Hey there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura. I like books and I like to talk about them. So thanks for being here. As you see in the title, this video is my favorite books of 2025. I personally read 25 books and I'm really proud of that. I feel like this past year was the first year that I truly always had a book I was reading. So I want to share my top 5 books. I'm not going to go in any particular order because they kind of span a couple different genres and it's hard to put them in an order. So without further ado, my first favorite read was a book called When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanithi. This book is a memoir of a man who is a surgeon and then is diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and his experience going from surgeon to patient. Paul is also clearly a very gifted writer, and he actually talks about in the book how he struggled to know, with the length of time he had left, when does he begin a writing career. This was something he hoped that he would do in his lifetime. So Paul actually passed away from this cancer before the book was finished, and the final chapter or so is written by his wife, and I just found it really, really moving. The book began with some really interesting info about his life becoming a surgeon and med school and just grappling with life and death as a student. And as he grows up and as he becomes a surgeon, experiences death firsthand, and then goes through it himself, he shares a lot of his insights. There are many things that stuck out to me in this book that I highlighted, but the one that I definitely will remember is something he says at the very end of the book and the very end of his life. He says to his daughter that if she ever wonders if she did anything important with her life, that she should remember that in a man's dying days, she provided such comfort and love and joy. So of course, that was really touching, as were many other things that he wrote. And it was a great reminder to me that the most important things in life are pretty much always going to be the relationships we have. All right, on to something lighter and in the fiction genre. I read the book Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy this year. I don't know if I say her name correctly. I talked about this actually in my last video about my favorite books in general, so I'm not going to touch too deeply on this, but the main reason this book makes my top 5 is because it was an easy to follow and engaging mystery while not being creepy. Plus, the setting is just really beautiful. Like, I wish that I could go to that island that this book is set on. It's kind of right outside of Antarctica, and I would think that that's like a barren wasteland, but this island, which is based on a real island, had so much wildlife and just even like the patterns of the tide and the marine life. The author, I feel like, did a great job researching and putting these things into the book. I also just have to say that I like the ending of the book a lot. I bet some people don't, but I will leave it there so that there's not a spoiler. My next favorite book is, again, in the nonfiction genre, and that is Dead Wake by Erik Larson. This book is a nonfiction retelling of the events of the sinking of the Lusitania in World War I. If you don't know about this event, it was a passenger liner cruising from America to Great Britain, and a German submarine torpedoed the boat. And the reason that it was a big piece of history, obviously people lost their lives, but it was also, during a time of war, an attack on majority civilians. Now, the reason this book is so engaging to me is because the author told it as if I was reading a fiction story, like just historical fiction. He really tried to make it feel like you're following some of the characters, but he also at the same time stuck strictly to the facts. There were some moments where I felt like, okay, this is a little bit like gray. I feel like we could use some more detail, but clearly the author is trying to just stick to facts and not embellish. So I really respect that and appreciate it. The other reason this story is compelling is it also shares the German point of view. So there was records of the people in the submarine and where they were cruising and what boats they saw. And so it kind of like rounded out the story and also built the tension because you know, oh my gosh, they're in the waters now that the Lusitania is going to be in, and you know that they're about to intersect. And yeah, it's really compelling. I thought it was a good piece of history to learn more about. And the final reason that this book stuck with me and was something that I brought up in conversation with people was the fact that there's all of these like little pieces and little hints throughout the book that show you just how much of a perfect storm it was that created the sinking of Lusitania. Like the Lusitania leaves port like 3 hours late, and you wouldn't think that that's a big deal. But if they had been 3 hours earlier, they would have missed the submarine. Or the fact that before this, Navy ships would travel in fleets, and if a boat was torpedoed, the rest of the boats were supposed to not stop because they would become easy target. So the British Navy realized that they can't just lose 5 or 10 or however many ships are traveling in a fleet at a time. So they were like, well, we can't have our boats being easy targets. So if a boat is torpedoed, you have to keep going. You cannot stop. The reason that that's significant is because when the Lusitania sinks, so many people lose their lives because the boats that are nearby that could rescue them are told to stay away to prevent more lives lost. So I hope you can see that it is a worthwhile read. I thought it was super entertaining, and I can't wait to read more of Erik Larson's nonfiction books. My next favorite read of the year is none other than Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. If you don't know this book, I feel like you might be living under a rock. I'm sorry, no offense. Definitely recommend reading it. So coming into reading this book with such a knowledge already of the plot and an expectation of what was going to happen, I did not think that this would hold up to its reputation. Let me tell you, it definitely does. The reason being is that Jane Austen's writing is very, very witty and charming and nuanced. And she gives characters humor, but I also feel like the way she's like narrating things or social scenarios feels very like, oh my gosh, that's so true, even though it's set in a time period very different from our own. Something else that I picked up on was that Pride and Prejudice were not 100% negative traits. So one of the characters is primarily like prejudiced towards another, and one of the characters is primarily prideful. And initially, this gives kind of a bad impression. But what I think is really cool is as the book develops, you see that for both of them, this trait or this like thing that motivates them actually has its roots in some really good things. It's just manifesting in a kind of negative way. I think both of the characters are protective of their family because they really love their family, and that is clearly a good thing. These things present as bad, and I do think it's bad to have a level of pride and a level of prejudice, but you kind of understand like, oh, of course that's how that character feels. The love story is also really sweet, and while the girl is like waiting, trying to figure out like, does this guy actually like me, or what's up with this, and waiting and wondering when's the next time she's gonna see him, I feel like I was also waiting with her. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like anxious, like to know like, when is he gonna see her again? And I think that takes some talent to not just have it feel like, oh, these pages are a waste. And instead, I felt like the pages were really useful, and it made me feel like, man, I just can't wait till like they see each other again. And my fourth and favorite book this year was The Catcher in the Rye. I went into the book with a glowing review from my brother who lent me the book, and so I kind of already had those like rose-colored glasses on, and I wanted to like the book, and so I ended up really liking the book. I do think it's a good book. I think people just go in with prejudice. The book follows a young guy. The book follows a kid named Holden who is kicked out of a boarding school and is honestly just trying to waste some time in New York City, where he's from, and just, getting into trouble and doing different random stuff. Just anything he has a whim to do, he goes and does. So the plot is very, very loose, but J.D. Salinger does a great job of helping us get to know Holden. I feel like Holden was a really like well-rounded, well, not a well-rounded person, but a well-rounded character. Like I feel like I could see lots of different parts of him in just these, 250 pages, just this weekend of his life. And I think it was really sweet and sad and moving to see a kid who has a lot of promise, but he's hurting and he needs help. So that completes my 4 favorite books. Thank you so much for listening. I'm curious if you have a favorite book from the year, and curious if you've read any of the books I liked and what you thought of them. So feel free to comment below, and I'll see you guys in my next video.